Awakening to Reverence. The sixth commandment is often remembered through only four words: Thou shalt not kill. Yet, like every genuine teaching, its deepest meaning reaches far beyond its surface. The purpose of this sixth commandment is not merely to prohibit the taking of life, it is to awaken reverence for life itself. Life quietly surrounds us every moment, every breath, every heartbeat, every person, every animal. Every ecosystem, every body of water, all belong to the same living mystery. Yet what is most familiar is often what we learn to overlook. The sixth commandment therefore asks us to look beyond behavior and toward the condition of our own heart. How do I encounter life? Do I move through the world with reverence or with indifference? The more separation dissolves, the more clearly we begin to recognize that life is never merely an object existing outside ourselves. We discover relationship. We begin to see that every living being participates within a vast community of existence where each life, however different, possesses an inherent dignity worthy of respect. As consciousness matures, our attention gradually shifts from what can I gain to how can I honor life. Every choice becomes an opportunity to deepen either separation or reverence. Every relationship becomes a mirror. Every encounter with another living being becomes an invitation to remember the sanctity of life. This does not require perfection. Life itself unfolds through continual transformation. Birth and death, growth and decay, receiving and giving, nothing within creation exists apart from these sacred rhythms. The sixth commandment is therefore not an invitation to pretend that life can exist without death. It is an invitation to participate within life with increasing reverence, gratitude, wisdom, and love. As consciousness matures, something beautiful begins to happen. We become increasingly aware of the countless lives that quietly sustain our own, the food that nourishes us, the animals entrusted to our care, the forests that breathe beside us, the waters that flow through every living thing, the people whose unseen labor makes our own lives possible. What once appeared ordinary slowly becomes sacred. Gratitude replaces entitlement. Stewardship replaces exploitation. Compassion replaces indifference. The desire to possess gradually gives way to the desire to participate. And the heart begins asking, how can I participate in life in a way that reflects the deepest love I presently know? The answer may look different from one person to another, yet the direction remains the same. As separation dissolves, reverence naturally expands. First toward ourselves, then toward those closest to us, then toward strangers, eventually toward all life. For unconditional love does not divide the sacred according to usefulness. It recognizes the miracle of life wherever it appears. Where reverence deepens, compassion naturally follows. Where compassion grows, separation quietly begins to disappear. The shadow of the sixth commandment. The shadow of the sixth commandment rarely announces itself through obvious cruelty. More often, it hides behind the ordinary ways modern society has learned to conceal suffering. The animals who become our food often live and die far from our sight. Forests disappear 1 acre at a time beneath machines we never witness. Rivers become polluted by choices made hundreds of miles away. Entire species quietly vanish before most of us ever knew they existed. Violence becomes easy to ignore when it happens somewhere else. The same pattern appears in countless forms: human trafficking, objectification, exploitative labor, factory farming, wildlife trafficking, animal neglect, destruction of habitats, pollution of Earth's waters, industrial practices that value production more than the lives they affect. Even the casual disregard shown toward the people, animals, and living communities around us quietly reflects something about the state of our own hearts. Perhaps the greatest danger is not deliberate cruelty, it is unconsciousness. For what quietly becomes ordinary is rarely questioned, and what is rarely questioned is seldom transformed. The invitation of the sixth commandment is therefore not condemnation, it is consciousness. To see what has become hidden, to remember what has been forgotten. For what remains hidden cannot be integrated, only what is seen can be consciously transformed. When suffering becomes visible, compassion has the opportunity to awaken. The sections that follow are not intended to condemn the world, nor to suggest that every person bears equal responsibility for every form of suffering. They are mirrors, invitations to honestly examine the ways separation quietly appears within modern life. For every place where reverence has been forgotten becomes another place where love may begin to awaken. Humanity. The sixth commandment begins where every journey toward compassion must begin, with one another, before we ask how we treat the earth, before we ask how we treat animals. We must first ask how we treat the human beings who walk beside us. Every person possesses an inherent dignity that cannot be earned, purchased, or increased through achievement. It does not depend upon wealth, status, beauty, productivity, strength, intelligence, nor upon what another person believes they can gain from them. Life is sacred because it is life. Yet perhaps nowhere has modern society become more accustomed to forgetting this than in the countless ways human beings are quietly reduced to something less than who they truly are. Throughout history, countless people have been bought and sold as though they were property. Even today, human trafficking continues to exploit countless men, women, and children, reducing persons of immeasurable worth to commodities for profit. Many people also endure exploitative working conditions where long hours, unsafe environments, and poverty wages diminish the recognition of their inherent dignity. Migrant workers, undocumented laborers, and other vulnerable populations are often among those most easily exploited. While forced labor still exists within parts of today's global economy, others find themselves discarded when illness, age, or circumstance prevent them from producing as they once did. Many women continue to experience objectification where their humanity becomes overshadowed by appearance, sexuality, or the expectations placed upon their bodies. Their inherent dignity is quietly diminished whenever they are encountered primarily as objects of desire rather than as whole persons worthy of equal respect. Children, too, may become measured by performance, achievement, or future potential rather than being cherished simply for who they are. The elderly may become viewed as burdens rather than as lives carrying immeasurable wisdom and experience. Even within our daily relationships, this same shadow quietly appears whenever another person becomes useful before they become human. A friend becomes a convenience. A stranger becomes an obstacle. A customer becomes a transaction. A coworker becomes productivity. A neighbor becomes an inconvenience. Little by little, relationship gives way to utility. The sixth commandment quietly reminds us that this is where separation begins, not only in acts of violence, but in the subtle forgetting of another person's sacredness. Violence often begins long before a hand is ever raised. It begins wherever reverence quietly disappears. Whenever another life is measured primarily by what it can provide, compassion begins to fade. The sixth commandment therefore asks us to return to a way of seeing that modern life often obscures, to look beyond usefulness, beyond appearance, beyond status, beyond productivity, and to remember the simple miracle standing before us: another human being, not a function, not a resource, not a possession, not a product, a life, a conscious expression of the same mystery from which we ourselves have come. Before we seek to heal the world, we are first invited to heal the way we see one another. For every person we encounter becomes an opportunity to remember that the sanctity of life begins not somewhere else, but here. The sixth commandment therefore leaves us with an honest question. When I encounter another person, do I first see who they are or what they can do for me? For wherever human dignity is remembered, reverence quietly returns. And where reverence returns, compassion naturally follows. Industrial farming. The circle of reverence now expands beyond humanity to the lives that sustain much of humanity's food. For most people, nourishment arrives without a story. The meal appears upon the table, the packaging is discarded. The life that made the meal possible has quietly disappeared from view. Perhaps nowhere is this separation more visible than within many modern systems of industrial farming. Most people never witness the conditions in which food animals are born, raised, transported, or slaughtered. The distance between the consumer and the animal allows suffering to remain largely invisible. In many industrial systems, animals spend much of their lives in environments designed primarily for efficiency rather than for their natural behaviors. Confinement, overcrowding, chronic stress, injury, selective breeding for maximum production, long transportation, and fear before slaughter often become hidden costs paid by lives most people will never meet. The question is not whether every farm is the same. Many farmers care deeply for the animals entrusted to them, striving to provide humane conditions and respectful stewardship. Rather, the invitation is to become aware that not every system reflects that same reverence. When suffering remains unseen, compassion is easily forgotten. Distance has a way of softening our awareness. Convenience quietly replaces relationship. The life behind the meal slowly disappears behind efficiency, packaging, and consumption. The sixth commandment gently asks us to remember what has become hidden, not to awaken guilt, but gratitude, not condemnation, but consciousness. For every meal represents a relationship with another form of life. Whether one ultimately chooses to consume meat or not is a question each person must answer honestly before their own conscience. The sixth commandment does not begin by demanding identical conclusions. It begins by inviting us to see clearly, to remember that nourishment has never been merely a product. It has always been received through life. Perhaps the deepest question is therefore not, should I eat this? But have I become disconnected from the lives that sustain my own. As awareness deepens, many people naturally begin asking new questions. Where does my food come from? How were these animals treated? Can unnecessary suffering be reduced? Can gratitude become a greater part of the way I receive what sustains me? The answers may differ from one person to another, yet the direction remains the same. The awakened heart naturally seeks to deepen reverence wherever wisdom allows. For every life deserves to be encountered first as life before it is ever encountered as food. Where reverence returns, gratitude naturally follows. And where gratitude deepens, compassion quietly begins to reshape the heart. Stewardship. Not every relationship between humanity and animals ends in death. Many animals continue living while providing gifts that have sustained human communities for countless generations. Milk, eggs, honey, wool, these are not merely products. They are gifts received through a living relationship between humanity and another creature. Like every relationship, they can be shaped by either reverence or exploitation. Throughout history, many people have cared for the animals entrusted to them with deep respect, recognizing that good stewardship requires nourishment, protection, rest, and compassionate care. The well being of the animal was understood to be inseparable from the gift it provided. Yet modern systems can also reveal another possibility. When productivity becomes the highest priority, living relationships may gradually give way to extraction, repeated breeding, confinement, separation of mothers and their young, conditions that prevent natural behaviors. Animals valued primarily for what they produce rather than for the lives they live. Not every farm reflects these conditions. Many continue to demonstrate remarkable compassion and responsible stewardship. The sixth commandment does not ask us to ignore this difference. It asks us to become conscious of it. For stewardship is measured not only by what we receive, but by how we care for the life from which it is received. The gifts themselves are not the problem. The question is whether reverence remains present within the relationship that makes those gifts possible. Have we remembered the life behind the milk, the hen behind the egg, the bee behind the honey, the sheep behind the wool? Or have these gifts quietly become disconnected from the living beings through whom they were given? The sixth commandment invites us to look beyond the product and to rediscover the relationship. Not because every person must arrive at the same conclusion, but because every awakened heart naturally desires to receive with greater gratitude than before, to take no more than is needed, to care well for what has been entrusted, to recognize that genuine stewardship is never measured solely by productivity, it is measured by reverence. Whether one ultimately chooses to receive these gifts or not remains a matter of individual conscience. Yet the mirror remains the same for every heart. Do I see only what has been given, or have I remembered the life that made the gift possible? For wherever reverence guides stewardship, gratitude naturally follows. And wherever gratitude deepens, the relationship between humanity and the living world begins to heal. Wildlife. Not every creature lives beneath human care. Many live entirely beyond it. They ask nothing from us. They produce nothing for us. They belong not to humanity, but to the living world itself. Yet even here, the shadow of the sixth commandment quietly appears. Across the world, countless species continue to lose the places they have called home for generations. Forests become smaller, wetlands disappear, migration routes are interrupted, habitats become fragmented. Illegal wildlife trafficking continues to remove animals from the wild for profit. Poaching threatens species already struggling to survive. Pollution reaches places where few people ever look. Many populations quietly decline beyond the awareness of those whose lives are seldom touched by their disappearance. Every extinction represents more than the loss of a species. It is the loss of a unique expression of life that can never be repeated. A voice within creation falls silent. Once gone, it cannot simply be recreated. Many people will never witness the suffering experienced by wild creatures, nor will they see the quiet disappearance of the ecosystems upon which those lives depend. Distance often hides what proximity would awaken. What remains unseen is easily forgotten. The sixth commandment therefore invites us to widen the circle of our own compassion, not because wildlife exists to serve humanity, but because its existence possesses value beyond human usefulness. A bird does not sing for us alone. A whale does not swim for our entertainment. A wolf does not justify its existence by its usefulness to humanity. Each participates in the same mystery of life. Each contributes to the intricate relationships through which creation continually renews itself. To encounter wildlife with reverence is to remember that humanity has never been separate from the living world. We are participants within it, not masters standing outside it. Whether through protecting habitats, supporting conservation, reducing unnecessary harm, or simply learning to appreciate the creatures with whom we share this world, every act of reverence quietly strengthens the bond between ourselves and the greater community of life. The sixth commandment, therefore, leaves us with another honest question. What responsibility do I carry toward the lives with whom I share this world? For where reverence expands beyond ourselves, compassion naturally expands with it. And where compassion expands, separation quietly begins to disappear. The communities of life. Life does not exist in isolation. Every living being belongs to something greater than itself. A forest is more than trees. A wetland is more than water. A coral reef is more than coral. A mountain is more than stone. Every ecosystem is a living community, woven together through relationships that have developed across countless generations. Trees shelter birds, birds disperse seeds, insects pollinate flowers, fungi nourish the soil, rivers sustain forests, forests protect rivers, each life quietly supports another. Together they form communities upon which countless other lives, including our own, depend. Yet the shadow of the sixth commandment appears whenever these living communities are no longer encountered as communities. They become resources. Forests become timber. Mountains become minerals. Grasslands become development. Wetlands become vacant land. Living relationships disappear behind what can be extracted, harvested, or consumed. The issue is not that humanity receives gifts from the earth. Civilization has always depended upon the gifts of creation. Wood and stone build our homes, metals shape our tools. The earth has always provided abundantly. The question is not whether we receive, the question is whether we remember. Do we remember that behind every resource stands a living community that made that gift possible? Across the world, forests continue to disappear through logging, agricultural expansion, mining, and development. Habitats become fragmented, entire ecosystems are altered before most people ever know they existed. When one living relationship is removed, countless others are often affected in ways few people immediately recognize. Yet humanity also possesses an extraordinary capacity to restore what has been damaged. Every tree planted, every habitat protected, every wetland restored, every ecosystem allowed to recover becomes an act of reverence. Stewardship remembers that we are not merely consumers of the earth, we are participants within it. To participate well is to look beyond what can be taken, remembering instead the living relationships that quietly sustain every human life. The earth is not simply the place where we live, it is a living community of which we are already a part. The sixth commandment therefore leaves us with another question. When I look upon the world, do I see living communities or merely resources? For where reverence expands beyond individual lives, it naturally embraces the communities that sustain them. And where those communities are remembered, humanity slowly remembers its own place within the living web of life. Earth's waters. Water is the great circulatory system of life. It falls as rain, it gathers within streams. It flows through rivers, it fills lakes, it nourishes wetlands, it moves through underground aquifers. It eventually returns to the oceans, carrying with it the story of everything it has touched. Every living creature depends upon these waters. Every forest, every field, every animal, every human community, the waters of the earth do not belong to one nation or one generation. They quietly sustain all life. Yet the shadow of the sixth commandment appears here as well. Too often, the waters that gave life become places where humanity leaves behind the consequences it no longer wishes to see. Plastic drifts across rivers before eventually reaching the sea. Chemical runoff enters streams that nourish ecosystems and communities downstream. Untreated pollution damages habitats once flourished with life. Overfishing and destructive fishing practices place increasing pressure upon marine ecosystems that have sustained life for countless generations. Many freshwater systems face contamination, while wetlands that naturally cleanse and protect water continue to disappear. Much of this happens beyond the horizon of our daily lives. Distance once again makes suffering easier to overlook. Yet water remembers what we forgot. What enters a stream eventually reaches the river. What reaches a river eventually reaches the sea. The waters flowing through forests flow through cities. The waters sustaining wildlife also sustain humanity. Increasingly, the consequences of pollution return to us. Tiny plastic particles have been detected throughout oceans, in many forms of wildlife, and even within the human body. Scientists continue to study their long term effects, yet their presence alone reminds us of a profound truth. We cannot separate ourselves from the waters that sustain us. What we release into the living world does not simply disappear, it continues its journey. The sixth commandment therefore asks us to remember that water is not merely a resource, nor merely a place where consequences vanish. It is one of the great living relationships through which creation continually sustains itself. To care for Earth's waters is not simply to preserve nature, it is to honor the very system that make every breath, every meal, every community, and every future generation possible, whether through reducing pollution, protecting wetlands, supporting cleaner waterways, using resources more thoughtfully, or simply becoming more conscious of the unseen journey of water. Every act of stewardship becomes an expression of reverence. The sixth commandment therefore leaves us with one final honest question. Do I remember that the waters sustaining the world around me also sustain my own life? For where reverence reaches the waters, it quietly reaches every living thing they touch. And where the waters are honored, humanity remembers that it has never stood apart from the living world. It has always flowed within it. Reflection. The sixth commandment is not merely an invitation to refrain from taking life. It is an invitation to remember the sanctity of life itself. Throughout this chapter, we have witnessed many different expressions of the same shadow. Human beings reduced to utility, animals reduced to products, ecosystems reduced to resources, Earth's waters reduced to places of disposal. Though these shadows appear in different forms, they all arise from the same forgetting, the forgetting that life is sacred. The journey toward wholeness is not measured by how perfectly we navigate every question. Life is often complex, circumstances differ, difficult decisions remain. The sixth commandment does not ask us to pretend otherwise. Instead, it quietly asks something far deeper. Am I learning to encounter life with greater reverence than I did before? Every encounter becomes a mirror. The stranger, the child, the elder, the animal, the living world. Every moment invites the same quiet question. Do I first see usefulness, or do I first see life? Perhaps the awakened heart is not the one that possesses every answer. Perhaps it is simply the heart that can no longer ignore the sacredness quietly present within all things. For where reverence deepens, compassion naturally follows. Where compassion grows, stewardship naturally arises. Where stewardship flourishes, the wounds of separation begin to heal. The sixth commandment therefore leaves us not with guilt, nor fear, nor perfection, but with an invitation to walk more gently, to receive more gratefully, to care more consciously, to remember more fully. For every act of genuine reverence becomes an act of remembrance. Every act of remembrance becomes an expression of love. And wherever love becomes the way we participate in life, separation quietly disappears.